Hey, it's Neil from Heavyocity. I'm here to remind you to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. You will not regret it. And it's easy. Grab your phone. It says I'm already subscribed. Just click that button. Subscribe. Boom. Done. Then you get all the good news. Maybe even like a video. We would love you to do it. And you won't be sorry. Thank you. Hey everybody, it's Neil from Heavyocity, and I'm back with you for another edition of 2 Hour Cues. And just for people tuning in for the first time or new to our YouTube channel, let me explain what 2 Hour Cues is. Essentially, I write a cue, and it can be like a film trailer or a game trailer vibe. It could be dramatic underscore for a TV series or film, and I try to do it as quickly as I can. And then I walk through during the show the process of what I wrote and the parts that I wrote and how they may evoke energy or excitement or some eeriness. You know, what music does, it draws upon our emotions. As mentioned in other 2 Hour Cues, I rely on using our Heavyocity instruments to do the scoring, but anything you guys have can work. If you have your own string library or your preferred drum library, any of that stuff can be supplemented or exchanged for what I use. It's just really to demonstrate the idea. So in this week's episode of 2 Hour Cues, I'm going to focus on a track that's kind of in the style of Blade Runner 2049. I'm a big fan of synth and synth textures. So in some modern film scores, you can see there's a lot of composers that are merging and melding traditional orchestra with synth parts, or even taking it a step further where they're using synth parts to actually emulate what an orchestra would do. They might even write parts that were intended for a cello and a violin, but they're using these cooler kind of synth textures and get kind of into that hybrid zone where you're using real strings or real brass and mixing it up with synth tones and textures to kind of create that true modern scoring sound. And also, the reason I wanted to do this is, I'm a big fan of the synth stuff that I mentioned, but there's quite a few cool scores out there. The movies like Chappie. If you go back even to the 70s, the original Blade Runner, written by Vangelis, it was synth, and it's interesting to listen to that now. The style and use and the sounds are different, but the intent is the same. Even, I think, Scarface and Apocalypse Now had some synth elements in them as well. So this is not really a new idea, but it's become, I think, more readily used and accepted as a means to score a film. It's not like the days of cue up the orchestra and everything is going to be, the brass section and the winds and, the strings and the traditional percussion. It's kind of an anything goes. So in this particular cue that I wrote, we've got a lot of synth stuff that's emulating what the orchestra would do, but I also have some orchestral elements in there. I have some strings, violins, violas, cellos, a couple of brass parts, and the rest is really analog synth vibe stuff and some percussion. So why don't we just get right to it? All right, cool. So I'm going to stop it there, and we can start to kind of dissect what's happening in the beginning. I'm going to take the strings out, the orchestral strings. So let's mute that and take a listen to just what's happening with the synth. So we have a synth bass part here. So the bass is laying down the foundation, and then there's kind of this big swelly pad, all is revealed, which starts in a bit, so. So that's, it's adding a cool kind of growly texture. You can see the filter opening along with the volume. So that's a lot of what's happening in the background. And then if we unsolo those things and take a listen to what else is happening, simple piano. So here I'm using a simple piano that's really wet, and it happens to be the Aeon piano, and I have the punish knob cranked all the way up. I'm using the lightest velocity, so it has kind of a cool sound. It also has a reverse delay to it. It does a good job of creating the vibe, the soupy vibe. You can hear that reverse delay swell in right here. And then there's a simple percussion part starting here. Booms. And more. So the woods over here are creating that motion. It's really just a loop. Later on, down the piece, have another woods loop just to change it up. So playing those elements, let's just take a look without the strings. So it's a pretty sparse vibe to that. And so the reason to bring strings in was really kind of an experiment, I think, for me to see, can we weave a melody into this that doesn't take up too much space, yet isn't a super strong melody like our last 2-hour cues, where it was superhero theme and it was brass and strings and it really hung on that melody. That was the core of the piece. So I'm going to put the melody back in now, the string melody, and we'll just see how that works with the synth stuff. In doing that, I elected to write a melody that was kind of a longer sweeping melody, so it wasn't too busy, still had that open feeling. And what I did in this case to get more of a unique texture was I had two different parts playing the violins. So if we start at bar 7 and solo the violins from Novo, so I also feathered in the violins from Rhythmic Textures as well. And it's a slight tremolo, just adds a little more texture to it. So you get the idea from that. And then underneath it we had violas. And I did the same thing, violas from Novo, and then to add in a little more texture, violas from Rhythmic Textures again. So let's see what we got here. Just kind of ghosting an octave below. And you can hear that subtle, tremolo from the rhythmic textures. So together, we have this. Cool. And then at 15, the cellos come in. Really the bow, dun, dun, and you can hear, I think I have the cellos, in this case, from rhythmic textures, pushed up a bit more. Kind of a neat performance without... It just seems to breathe a little bit better. Now going into the next section, things start to percolate a bit more in the synth department. So let's just mute the strings for now. Here. So let's kind of dissect what's going on at bar 19. Here you hear the synth part. Chord change. And again, we check that out with the big swell synth. So that's kind of shaping, this sound, this vibe. It sounds kind of larger than life. And if we put the piano in, it's that wet piano that's very distant, but I feel like it gives it this space that seems to work. Let's take a listen. Keeps kind of building and morphing. So if we throw in some of the elements here to round out what's happening in the section, minus the strings. You also have this addition of this kind of synth melody line. It has this kind of cool tone to it. And that kind of plays off the piano a little bit. And if we add in a bit of the synth, kind of the synth meat. So you'll notice without this kind of synth designer ARP part, which is pretty busy, it has a completely different feel. So when you put that in, it propels the piece further forward. So you get the idea from that. And then again with the drums going on. And again, the drums are kind of just the wood clacking away and a lot of kind of sub booms for ambient kind of low energy, you know? And then at this section in bar 39, it kind of opens up. It slows down a little bit. So before we get there, let's check out what the orchestra parts are doing. So there's more motion in the low end. You'll see the melody is ghosting up here in the beginning of this section along with the synth. And then the low end of it kind of picks up with the violas and the cellos and the bass. So again, I'll play that. So let's see what's going on with the lower parts here. We have the cellos and the viola. So you'll notice at bar 36, that's really where the cellos kind of take the lead with the melody. It starts to slow down. The vibe is just more open. So if we listen to that in context again. Tails off to the end. So what is going on here? So at 36, bar 36 is our kind of lull, and we have, as I've said, the low end kind of picking up some of the slack. But if we were to pull out the strings and the brass too, and just take a listen to what happens with just the synth section, and the drums, you know, it becomes a lot more sparse and open, and it still works that way, I think. To me, the most powerful thing is this kind of thick pad. And we have New York's finest fire department outside. really like that sound, and there's, it's a chordal thing happening. It tells a lot of the story. The percussion moves it along, and then the piano isn't 100% necessary, in my opinion. Like, if we take that section, again, without the piano. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's pretty ambient. It's got a lot of kind of thickness going on. The piano just kind of points out a few melodic notes to help the section along. If we start right where that section starts. Again, we've got this space kind of lead and the piano, and then the strings are filling in. So let's put those back in, and then we can take a quick look at what the brass is doing. If we check out the brass here, exciting. It's supporting what's going on with the string melody and also the piano. So if we put the strings back in with that. So even though this is all orchestral stuff, using some of these sounds like the rhythmic textures, cellos, there's that tremolo performance that's happening, and it gives it a little more personality, I think. And it does stand on its own in this section. You have the kind of tremolo strings, whether it's the cello in the low section or the violas and violins, which are adding in kind of different colors, and there's emotion to it because of the. So let's just listen to that and check that out. So that's all happening, and there's a lot going on in this soup. But again, if we take a listen to this All Is Revealed pad, so you can see there is this filter opening up and volume is swelling. And I feel like that slow-moving chordal stuff gives it this arc and kind of moves it along. It's also a very full-bodied part, which gives the low end a nice warmth with everything in. The general vibe is clearly it's not percussion driven, it's not a trailer, it's not a big hero theme. It's more about ambience, vibe, suspense, and kind of it has this feeling it wants to suck you in. It's a little dark, and most of that is really driven, I think, by the synth parts. The piano kind of pokes out and hits certain notes that pull you along. And then the strings often are more textural with these long notes. And I think that those elements together give you this sound, which is kind of wide open. It's a vibe piece. All right, so taking it from the end outro, let's listen to what we have. So you're hearing this pad thumper part. I can't get to the note, it's too low. And the strings kind of tailing out and the synth tailing out. So in combining this piece, there's two flavors. There's kind of the orchestra, represented by the strings. And then we have the synth stuff, which still sounds stringy. It's just that analog string vibe. And the two, I think, complement pretty nicely. And then if you add in the piano and kind of that old school analog synth lead line, it gives it that flavor, that kind of Blade Runner vibe. And again, it's a bit busy to be a cue that's very kind of underneath dialogue, but I wanted to throw in a good amount of elements just to show you how things are working. The strings are working together and they're creating a vibe on their own, but also complementing the base layer of all the synthesizers. And the drums are not out front, they're not in your face, they're just kind of keeping this propulsion, this movement forward. So let me play it from the top. It's out. Cool. So one other thing I wanted to talk about, which I haven't really covered in a different 2-hour Qs episode, is using plugins, EQs, compressors, things like that. After sitting down with our extraordinary mix engineer, Satoshi Noguchi, we did Mix the Score, our first episode, which was really fun. That's online now. You should check it out. Why not use plugins to help shape the sound of what you're doing? I'm not going to get super in depth here, but I want to just quickly run through some of the parts. Like I have an EQ on the cellos, pulling out a bit of the nasal quality, something that Satoshi pointed out, which was super helpful. Also using this Brilliance kind of EQ boost, it's 10K, pulling out a bit of that rosin on the bow. And then finally this SSL compressor, and I'm not hitting it hard, it's just a small amount of compression. The other thing going on is I'm using a couple of external reverbs. You can use any reverb. I am fortunate to have a couple of Percussion reverbs, which are outboard reverb units, and they sound great. So in this case, I'm running one, and this is the interface to control it as a hall. And it's a bit longer, 2.6 seconds. And again, this is mainly for the strings to make them a little more wet and ambient and to sit in the mix better along with the synths, which already have that kind of wet open quality. And the second one, the second Percussion I have, let's pull that onto the screen. And this one, I'm running a room. If we listen to the strings, so it gives it a nice tail, and it blends a little better with the synth. You hear that tail. With the synth, I might have gone a bit overboard here. Some might say, yes, you did, Neil. This kind of chunky bottom end. So we've got an SSL bus compressor, just tightening the bottom a little. And then I added a little more sheen to it. Just get a little more of that kind of bite to it. I guess just because I could, I added this SSL with a small amount of EQ. I don't know if you've noticed, but I've switched over to PC, and so far it's really working well. So this is a Massenburg EQ. So it's really boosting the thicker low end at 80 hertz and boosting 114. And let's see, like if 4 plugins wasn't enough, really, dude, we have this Fab Filter Pro L2, which is basically like a limiter. It's not like a limiter, it's a limiter. Just kind of just babysitting the level. Listen to this. Our big fat synth wash. Wow. Look at all that high end. Helps it pop through the mix nicely. And then after that, we have an old school 1176, which is compressing a little bit and warming it up. Not too much compression. And then compensating with a little extra volume. Let's see, with the drums. Let's solo out of... All right, so again, we're using this Massenburg EQ. And what are we doing? We're pulling a little of the bottom out, 167 hertz, taking some of that kick mud out. And as you can see, we're really boosting some top end there. Helps it cut through the mix. And on that as well is, whoa, the Shadow Hills compressor. Just a little bit of movement on the needles in this section at least. All right, and then lastly, we will check out the piano. Brightening that up, pushing a little bottom, and then a little more compression. It keeps it, from kind of really poking out too much. So let's hear what that sounds like in the mix. So it's pretty wet. It's not super pointy. The compression is kind of holding that back. There's a couple other reverbs going on here. I have a 480L, which is like a Lexicon reverb, which was a staple in the 80s, early 90s. And I don't think there's much going there, just the synthetic track that we listened to earlier. Almost a halo of wetness around it. which adds to the depth. And that's about it. So again, thanks for tuning in and watching our third episode of 2 Hour Cues. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button and tune in next time. Thanks again.